June 4th, 1942. 0702 by the cockpit clock, the kind with a black face and stubborn hands that vibrate with the engine. North of Midway, the Pacific looks like hammered steel under a low, ragged ceiling. Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, commander of Torpedo Squadron 8, thumps the Devastator's side panel with a gloved knuckle the way flyers do to make machines feel seen. He cracks right, away from the Hornet Air Group's prescribed heading. The formation follows, noses low, prop tips stirring spray as they settle to mast height. The order is never shouted. It is lived in the angle of bank and the clean, uncompromising set of a leader's shoulders. In the rear seats, radio men gunners smell hot oil and the faint sweetness of aviation gasoline, each man mentally checking the same list. Belts, fuses, chocks kicked, safety pins pulled, torpedo shackle tight. The TBD-1 is a straight-wing anachronism in a world that has suddenly sped up, but it carries the Navy's promise under the belly, a single Mk-13 torpedo that must be dropped low and slow to behave. Clouds hang between 1,500 and 2,000 feet, a scrim that hides and deceives. It will help the slow birds sneak close, and it will scatter the fast ones who try to find each other at altitude. Above, somewhere, Zeros idle like razors tucked in a sleeve. Waldron has told his boys the bearing he trusts, and they trust him back, because trust is the only navigation that never wavers when compasses and radios do. Ensign George Tex Gay, youngest in spirit if not in years, steals a glance left and right as ocean and sky slice past his canopy. He has memorized ditching procedures that won't matter and prayed the short, practical prayers men use when they want to keep their hands steady. There is a moment in every battle when the outcome has not changed yet but soon will, a hinge that clicks because someone leans their full weight against it. Waldron, who knows the Devastator's 110 to 120 knot approach profile, is an invitation to be slaughtered by 320-mile-per-hour fighters, leans anyway. He cannot conjure escort, he cannot sharpen his airplane's teeth by will. What he can do is make the enemy react at the wrong altitude and the wrong time. The tactic is as old as cavalry against guns. Charge where discipline says you shouldn't, because consequence lives 3 moves ahead. At Midway, the geometry is simple and merciless. Carriers must turn into torpedo tracks to comb them, turning steals time from recovering and relaunching aircraft. Fighters dragged down to sea level win the knife fight and lose the roof. Somewhere above the ceiling is a second act waiting to happen. Fuel check, someone would have said, because aviators turn fear into procedure. Fuel sufficient, someone would have answered, because procedure turns men into a unit. A radio man flexes a hand around the .30 caliber grip behind him and thinks of the way brass smells after a short burst. The Mk-13 under the belly is temperamental, prone to run deep, to yaw, to detonate late or not at all. But doctrine is doctrine. Drop under 150 feet, don't exceed 120 knots, hold steady through the ugliest seconds you'll ever fly. On the horizon, the sea kinks where wakes cut it. It is not yet the Japanese carriers, not yet the honeyed wood decks and red discs and orderly crews, but the American eye believes the outline before the brain approves. At Station Hypo on Oahu, the day's story has already been typeset in subtle phrases. AF is short of water, the decoy message, and then the intercepts that gave Nimitz confidence to stake 3 carriers against 4. On Hornet's chart table, Point Luck has been a small innocent circle all morning. Now it becomes an address where courage will be delivered in bulk. The men in these cockpits are the couriers. They did not set the trap, but they will spring it one way or another. That they might accomplish it by failing is a kind of American heresy. Tactically senseless, strategically perfect. The Navy will not decide that until later. Right now, it is just men in aluminum at wave height, listening to engines that have begun to sound like promise and threat in a single note. Waldron toggles the throat mic. He would have kept his words few, clear. the way officers do when everything has to fit in a breath. The formation tightens. Spray smokes off the lead ship's wheels. If a reader could freeze the tableau and label it with specifications, the facts would look like poetry. TBD-1 Devastator, maximum speed 200 and a handful, crew of 3. Mach 13, 1,600 pounds of American intent, ceiling broken to overcast, wind southeast and mild, enemy Cap Mitsubishi, a 6M2 Model 21, fast and agile, unarmoured, ruthless. Labels do not smell like oil. Labels do not know fear. The men do, and they go anyway. A gull wheels once, indifferent. The Devastators taper into a line abreast like old cavalry forming for a charge where speed is illusion and steadiness is everything. The ocean is very large and the airplanes are very small, but the hinge is here and it is about to turn. Waldron's left hand eases the throttle, his right steadies on the stick. He looks where the enemy will be, not where they are. "We'll go in," he says at last, and the formation slides forward as if pulled by a wire only he can see. A grease pencil squeaks a small circle onto a transparent plot board aboard Enterprise, the kind of humble sound that never makes it into movies because it is too quiet to carry the weight it deserves. That circle has a name, Point Luck, and it sits northeast of Midway like a patient fisherman's skiff. Days earlier, in a basement at Pearl, station hypos watchstanders listened to paper ribbon tick from a cipher machine and told Admiral Nimitz what their trick had confirmed. A F was short of water, and AF meant Midway. Intelligence does not fight the battle, but it chooses where the battle will happen, and sometimes that is the greater strength. The Admiral's gamble brought Enterprise, CV-6, Hornet, CV-8, and the battered but game Yorktown, CV-5, to this empty quadrant of ocean, 3 decks against 4 Japanese fleet carriers. The arithmetic looks unfavourable to anyone who counts ships. To a strategist, it already balances differently. At Midway itself, Marines wipe coral dust from Wildcats and load belts with .50 caliber rounds that clink like coins. A radar set with a green heart is warmed and watched. An aerographer's mate licks a finger and shrugs toward the southeast breeze. He has seen too many mornings not to respect a low ceiling. The day will hide and reveal in uneven measure. When the Japanese launch their initial strike at around 0430, their B-5N Kates and D-3A Vals rising from teak decks with the self-assurance of a navy that has not lost a carrier yet, the geometry of the day is already locked into its first pattern. What remains is how cleanly each side can skate along the surface of that pattern without falling. On Hornet, the air group brief is crisp, almost too crisp. There are lines to follow, rendezvous to honour, altitudes to hold, roles to play, dive bombers up high to strike from the sun, fighters to cut and parry with the CAP, torpedo planes to menace from sea level where warships fear them most. Waldron listens, nods, and makes a private decision in a public cockpit later. He believes from experience and from the quiet instruments in his head that the enemy is not where the arrows say. In 1942, there is much that is technical and little that is automated. Judgment still beats the radio by a healthy margin. Point luck is also a test of nerves. To wait is harder than to charge. Nimitz has positioned his carriers where they can pounce from the edge of knowledge, not the centre of it. It feels like a fisherman must feel when he knows the big run is due and nothing happens for hours. Then a blip at Midway, inbound raid detected at roughly 90 miles, and a dozen other small indicators that taste like copper in the mouth. The Marines at Midway will take the first punch. Their runways will grow pocked, their fuel lines will hiss, their flyers will scramble in good order to die bravely. But the decisive turns are not on Midway. They are out here, where American decks wait with their own sting in store. Yorktown, bruised at Coral Sea and repaired with a speed that looks like fiction but isn't, steams with fresh paint over plate scars. Below, a machinist's mate checks a bearing by touch, an old trick that beat instruments when instruments were twitchy. The ship carries VT-3, the Torpedo Squadron that will later tally losses on a single dry page. This morning, those men eat eggs that taste a little like salt because everything on a carrier tastes like salt. They are young and not young, confident and not, and they trust their machines because distrust on the edge of combat is a luxury that breaks formation. What Japan brings is formidable. Vice Admiral Nagumo's Kido Butai, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, each with its air group, each with 0 fighters that can climb like thoughts, dive bombers that sting, torpedo planes that carve wakes into fatal geometry. They expect to draw out the remaining American carriers and execute the kind of coup that keeps an empire expanding. They do not expect Americans to arrive unescorted at sea level and refuse to break off. They certainly do not expect the sky to empty above them at exactly the wrong minute. Point luck is a circle and a philosophy. It says, let the enemy reveal himself, then hit him with a plan that uses his rhythm against him. It admits that some things will go wrong. The plan for the morning is elegant. Assembled strikes, coordinated altitude deconfliction, fighters for the torpedo squadrons. What the sea and the weather and the fog of war will do to it is what they always do. Introduce noise that only courage can filter. The devastators are slower than anyone likes. The Mk-13S are crankier than anyone admits. The rendezvous will fray, the radios will garble. The hinge still waits. In the factory towns back home, a different hinge is oiled. Production schedules inch upward. The country's muscle has not yet flexed to its peak, but it is warming. A nation will soon replace, and then overmatch, and then drown the enemy in things that fly and float and detonate. For now, there is only the circle on the board and the silence of big ships coasting into position. The sea remarks nothing. An officer wipes the grease pencil mark with a sleeve and redraws it darker, as if thickening a line could thicken resolve. Out beyond the horizon, Waldron's boys are already committed. The circle holds. The factory bell at Bethpage clangs with the unmusical honesty of steel. It is the sound a nation makes when it decides to build its way out of danger. Ruth wipes chalk dust from her sleeve and runs a hand along a TBF-1 Avenger fuselage skin, the aluminum cold as a winter rail. She is a line lead, which means she knows the names of the women who buck rivets in the belly and the men who wheel subassemblies from the freight door, and she can tell by the pitch of a drill when a bit is about to bite a knuckle. The night shift breathes differently than day. The fluorescent hum is louder. Jokes carry farther. Time folds in on itself. On the wall, a calendar has a circle drawn around June, and under it somebody's pencil has pressed. They'll need all we can build. The Devastator, the old TBD-1, still rules the decks at sea this morning, but in Bethpage, the future is already in primer. The Avenger's lines are thicker, its wing roots meatier, its turret powered and eager. Where the TBD carried a single .30 in the stern, the TBF wears a .50 like a shrug and accepts protection as a design premise rather than a late wish. Self-sealing fuel tanks, armour backed by cramped forgiveness, foldable wings to pack more death aboard a carrier, details that turn a workshop into a war plan. Ruth does not recite speeds and ranges unless an inspector asks. What she feels is the weight of a nation's expectation pressing through the skin into the ribs. The airplane is big enough to carry that weight. There is a whiteboard near the foreman's cage where numbers bloom like spring plants. Output, month over month. Rework rates down 2 points. A note from Navy Acceptance bragging on a flawless engine test in bitter air. Someone has tacked up a newspaper clipping about a battle far away, where carriers squared off and both sides bled. They will learn it was Coral Sea. They will read that Yorktown limped home and limped back out again, camouflaged by speed and willpower. The line smiles at that because they recognise their temperament in a ship that refuses to stay broken. On the jig, a crew sets a turret ring, taps it into seating with a rubber mallet like a drummer finding the beat. They talk ration books and scrap drives, nicknames and pay raises. They compare the way a new boy from the farm holds a rivet gun with the way a new pilot grips a control stick in photographs. The factory erases distance. The hand that peens a rivet also closes a canopy 3,000 miles away. A Navy acceptance pilot, one of those lean, polite men who bring the air into the shop when they visit, signs a card that will ride with the airplane to the war. He thanks the crew and means it. When he tells them the TBF will be the torpedo plane that carries the fight back across the ocean, they pretend not to swell. The night hums and the numbers settle, and then some genius with a pencil draws a graph that is almost obscene. Aircraft production will double and then double again. A single year will vomit forth more airplanes than enemies have built in wars entire. Essex-class carriers, thick-decked, efficient, relentless, are already laid down like a pledge. There is an impossible statistic nobody here knows yet, but would love to. By late war, a single American yard will turn out hulls on a schedule that makes admirals grin. For now, the Avenger is enough. Its range, its punch, its survivability, a promise that the next generation will not be asked to commit to the exact same odds as Waldron's boys. Ruth's husband writes from a plant in Michigan about Pratt & Whitney engines, about tolerances and how heat makes the best inspector, about a foreman who insists tools be set in order before the whistle. Their marriage is steel and letters and the sweet ache of missing. She reads his postscript to the crew, and they clap the way crews do when pride has outpaced privacy. A whistle somewhere signals break. Coffee tastes of tin. A woman rubs her fingers where the rivet gun shivered them and says she can work through it. She is thinking about a name stenciled on a cowling in white block letters that will go somewhere too bright for the eye. By dawn, the plant has exhaled another airplane into the cold air. It looks ungainly in primer, like some seabird not yet certain of flight, and then the engine coughs and clears its throat and the shape makes sense. An acceptance pilot walks the wing, salutes the crew with a grin that is part ceremony and part superstition, and climbs in. The canopy slides shut with the expensive sound of precision. In the slipstream, the chalk dust from Ruth's sleeve lifts and disappears like fog. Out over the ocean, a devastator is already heading for the beehive. In a few hours, the first 6 Avengers sent from Midway itself will learn a terrible debut. The line does not know this yet. The line knows only that the calendar says June and the pencils have made a circle around the date, and the door is rolling up and the new TBF is taxiing into a morning that will need everything they can build. Dawn takes its time on Midway, and the coral runway gives it back in glare. The 6 TBF-1 Avengers of VT-8's Midway detachment squat like patient bulldogs, new paint still smelling of solvent, gull wings arched. Mechanics slap cowlings and step back. Lieutenant Langdon Feebling walks quick and quiet, a man whose body understands that leadership at mast height is mostly example. The detachment rolls, prop wash blasting coral dust into skirts of brown. In the towers, someone watches the blips and the word moves like a rumour that matters. Enemy carriers somewhere northwest, screening ships in the van. The Marines have already fought and bled and will fight again. Now the Navy's newest torpedo planes get their first bite. The Avenger is the Devastator's successor by every sensible measure. Faster, tougher, more teeth up top, more forgiveness in the belly. But the ocean does not care about succession. Doctrine demands low and slow to nurse the Mach 13. Engineering has not yet finished its courtship with reality. Feebling's 6 go anyway. Behind, the island grows small and honest. Ahead, the sea kinks where ships cut it. The detachment finds the screen because the screen is designed to be found first, its AA guns talking in multiple dialects. 25mm burrs, the hard punctuation of 5-inch. The pattern is old as naval aviation. Turn into the torpedo tracks, throw up steel, trust your fighters to remove the problem at the source. Zeros arrive like thrown knives. The turret arcs and barks. A radio man feels the turret shudder and thinks absurdly of a factory test stand and a foreman who told him to keep his elbows in. Fuselages take hits that stink of cordite and hot paint. The Avengers' armour does something the Devastators never could. It buys seconds a man can use. It is not enough. 5 of the 6 will go down in quick, dirty entries that leave oil on the surface like bruises. The survivor, Ensign Ernest's crew, with Arm 3C Harry Ferrier wounded and the gunner dead, will limp for home with holes a cat could climb through, a triumph that looks like a wreck and is more beautiful for its ruin. The debut, in other words, is honest. It proves what the Navy will insist on learning. Courage must be matched by iteration. Incoming B-26s make their own torpedo runs like long, doomed decisions. One will buzz a carrier's island so closely that men can see the pilot's face, which is the sort of intimacy war pretends to despise but secretly loves to create. The Japanese keep turning into tracks, keep throwing up metal, keep trusting their CAP to cut the low flyers to pieces. It works. It always works, until it creates the one condition where it doesn't. The cap burns fuel down low, it burns attention down low, it learns to hunt the slow things with its head down. Up above, in the clean air where tactical surprise always waits, somebody else is coming. The impossible statistic today is humble. 5 of 6 Avengers shot down in minutes, and still the debut matters because it puts pressure on the clock and on the men who must manage it. Torpedoes that likely ran bad anyway are not the point yet. The point is that every torpedo run drags the day's axis toward the sea and fixes great ships in evasive patterns that look like safety and are actually schedule poison. Flight decks need steady wind down the angle to recover and relaunch. Evasion spoils that. While a deck crew is wrestling with stalling procedures and the boss is scribbling arithmetic in sweat, fate walks in with wings and dive brakes. If the day were only tactical, the 6 would be a footnote. But back in Bethpage and Detroit and San Diego, the lines are ramping, and that turns footnotes into chapters. American industry will flood the calendar with Avengers, with spare engines and props, with better fuses and drag rings for the Mk-13 that let torpedoes survive faster drops. An old torpedo plane dies making a window. A new torpedo plane will later exploit that window with methods that respect physics less superstitiously. The detachment's sacrifice is not senseless because a system exists to turn blood into throughput. The enemy sees the effect, but not the pipeline. The survivor comes in hot and wrong, but alive. The Avenger squatting on a flat tire, the radio man bleeding through his shirt, the gunner's station silent. Ground crew swarm and go quiet when they look inside. A mechanic places a hand flat on the warm skin, as if apology could travel through aluminum. News travels at animal speed on an island. In an hour, everyone knows the simple, hard outline. 5 of 6 down, 1 wreck wheeled off to the side, pilots and crew accounted for by nods and averted eyes. They also know, because men at war always do, that the enemy felt those 6 in ways that will matter later. Above the overcast, another chapter is angling in. The sea at wave height looks like a wall that moves sideways. VT-8 rides it anyway, the Devastators strung low and steady, prop discs stroking spindrift into silver threads. Waldron has already made his turn from the briefed vector, leaning into the map that exists behind his eyes. Radios crackle in the old, crowded way. Men pass the same short phrase along the line. Stay in, stay in. Ahead, tiny black bees begin to appear and then multiply. They are zeros curling down, light on their feet and mean. The squadron holds formation the way discipline holds a man's jaw shut when argument would be fatal. At this height the air smells like the ocean, plus something burned. The Mk-13 is a stubborn passenger. It wants a gentle release, the kind men time with breaths counted in training halls. Waldron knows he is carrying an antique into a knife fight. He also knows that knives, even flung by experts, follow rules. Drag the fighters down, fix the ships in turns, make them commit to their own doctrine. The squadron flies straight into a mathematics problem and tries to solve it with flesh. Zeros scythe through the formation as if insulted by propeller arcs. Tail gunners rake as their arcs allow, the 30-aughts coughing pebbles at cats. One devastator lifts nose, then sinks, smoking. Another peels off like a leaf unwillingly freed. Texgay holds the sight picture on Soryu longer than a camera would tolerate and releases, because that is what you do when history is watching. He feels the airplane jump lighter, feels an impossible hope that the torpedo will behave and that the carrier will guess wrong, and then the zero comes. Gay's devastator is mortally struck. He will ride her into the water, kick loose, inflate a cushion, and become the strangest witness a historian could order from a catalogue. On Japanese bridges, men curse in clean, clipped syllables that carry respect, even when sharpened. They are not surprised that Americans attack. They are surprised that Americans do not break off when the angles go bad. They are not surprised that torpedoes come in low. They are surprised that they keep coming, a dogged procession of beliefs made manifest in aluminum. The CAP keeps cutting. The CAP keeps winning. The CAP keeps losing altitude and fuel. Down here, death is a hunter and a teacher. Up there, the sky is clearing. VT-8's butcher's bill will read like fiction if you do not know the period. 15 devastators out, 15 down, 29 of 30 aircrew lost. One man floating, alive, watching. The squadron's tactical success is 0. Its strategic success is pure, brutal, and exact. The carriers are committed to evasion. The cap is leashed to the deck. The day's schedule, always the secret weapon of naval aviation, is blown off time. The window will be measured later in minutes, and historians will argue exact sequences the way old priests argue liturgy. What the men feel is simpler. There is suddenly a hole above the enemy that did not exist when the run began. If the torpedo is the weak link today, the chain will be reforged. Depth settings will be corrected with the unglamorous insistence of engineers who hate waste. Drag rings will arrive, letting Mk-13S survive faster, higher drops. The Avenger will carry them better. Fighter escort will be insisted upon. Coordinated packages, fighters, torpedo planes, dive bombers, will become religion, not rhetoric. VT-8 buys the future the way pioneers buy farmland, with pain paid forward. Texgay bobs in the swell and arranges himself under the seat cushion to make a smaller target. He tastes salt and gas, watches the horizon through a seam, and counts breaths the way men count blessings they are not ready to say aloud. His eyes, stung and wide, will record something that reads like poetry when told plain. Black-orange blossoms rising from carriers minutes later, the kind of sudden, consuming ruin that makes the sea itself seem to recoil. Gay can't know the clock, he can know the colours. He will later tell it in simple sentences because truth improves when handled without varnish. Waldron is gone by then. Leadership often is. The squadron he led into the beehive has scattered into names written on paper and a window carved in time. Above the ceiling, fate has put on dive brakes. In a few minutes, the great ships that danced away from torpedo tracks will discover that they have danced into something worse. VT-8's story does not end with a hit. It ends with a hole in the sky that others will fall through, bombs first. That is not how the movies teach victory. It is how the war learned it. If courage were rare, one hammer would have been enough. The day brings two more. Eugene Lindsay of VT-6 cinches his harness over ribs that still remember a landing accident, nods to a crewman whose concern he refuses kindly, and points the Enterprise devastators into the same steel weather. He will not preach, he will press. The sea does not change its rules for a second squadron. Zeros still carve arcs like calligraphy. Ships still turn into tracks as if obeying scripture. Lindsay's men run the profile anyway, the same low, the same slow, banking only when the geometry demands it and not a heartbeat sooner, because heartbeats are the only currency they have left to spend. The pattern repeats and deepens. VT6 loses 10 of 14. The survivors return with stories measured in inches and seconds. A tracer that stitched the canopy frame and somehow forgot the flesh an inch away. A torpedo that shrugged and ran stupid. A wingman's last moment remembered as a flicker in peripheral vision. Doctrine insists that torpedo squadrons be escorted. Weather and rendezvous and the old friction of war insist on solitude. The Devastator proves once again that bravery and obsolescence look nearly identical from a distance. From Yorktown comes VT3 under Lem Massey, the third hammer poised over the same nail. If there is a romance to repeating failure until it becomes a doorway, Massey cannot afford it. He has assignments and waypoints and a sky that won't hold still. VT3 commits along a different axis but falls under the same physics lesson. Zeros go fast. Devastators must not. Anti-aircraft guns bite with anger that feels personal because it is the sort of machine anger men aim. 10 of 12 will not come back. Yorktown's action report will capture their absence with a line so short you can miss it if you blink. 10 VT lost. It takes almost no ink to draw a grave. In Japanese cockpits, men start to do the arithmetic that commanders want to avoid. Fuel state, ammunition count, minutes to the next cycle, the distance to the recovery pattern if the boss calls everyone home right now. Down low, the hunt is still good. Up high, the air has grown too quiet. A section leader hammers his canopy rail with a gloved fist. Not anger, precisely, but the human need to make a noise that matches what the math has told him. We are exactly where the enemy wants us, and they made us want it too. The impossible statistic today wears a human face. 3 torpedo squadrons, dozens of airplanes, expended without a hit, while a nation back home will produce more aircraft in a single day, at its peak, than some enemies will manage in a month. That abundance is not yet visible to the men shoving throttles until their palms remember the knurling, but it exists, and it changes what sacrifice buys. When a democracy with a factory soul spends courage, the exchange rate is favourable. By now, carriers have been turning into torpedo tracks long enough to bake habits into motion. Every hard-over rudder order that saved a hull a minute ago stole seconds from a recovery the deck officer needed to call. Every smart evasion is also a delay. The flight deck, which is the true heart of a carrier, hates delay. It breathes rhythm. Disrupt rhythm and you steal striking power. The Devastators do not succeed by bleeding. They succeed by turning a symphony into a jam session where wrong notes multiply. The next movement will be played by different instruments. A Zero pilot glances up once and sees, or thinks he sees, a speck against the cloud the size of a fingernail clipped too short. He looks down again because the kill is here, hot and sure. His leader's voice in the phones drags him lower. Later, perhaps much later, he will remember that tiny doubt like a pebble discovered in a boot at day's end. For now, the Devastators still matter. They matter the way a doorstop matters in a house fire, small and stubborn and exactly in the way. Men die to keep it in place. Massey presses, Lindsay presses. Formation by formation, lifetimes shorter than good stories press. The sea keeps its promises and its secrets in equal measure. When at last both squadrons are spent, and the smoke behind them folds into the wind, the surface of the day has been raked enough times to leave a texture. Schedules are off, altitudes are wrong. Expectations, the most dangerous ordnance aboard any ship, have been tampered with. High above, dive brakes wait like hands poised over a piano. The second and third hammers fall, not to drive the nail home themselves, but to make the wood accept it. Far away, in plants that are already humming toward numbers engineers did not believe when they first wrote them, replacements turn on wheels. And in the quiet between engine notes, the sky finally opens. High over a Pacific, the colour of gunmetal, a line of SBD Dauntlesses tilts past level and points their noses straight down, dive brakes flowering into red-edged petals that turn air into a screaming instrument. In that instant, the battle stops being argument and becomes arithmetic. A pilot thumbs free an arming wire and watches a teak rectangle swell in his reflector sight until it fills the future. The altimeter spins like a gambler's wheel. The horizon leaves, the bomb rack shivers, the world narrows to a bead, a breath, and the pull of a gloved finger. Far below, the Japanese carriers still dance hard into torpedo tracks, their Zeros leashed low by the stubborn Americans who refused to break off. Up here is an empty roof, a gift bought in blood, and the Dauntless is made for roofs. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's judgment has guided Enterprise's group, first on a hunch, then on the wake of a lone destroyer tearing north, a chalk-white arrow on slate water. Now Kaga's deck steadies in his sight picture, and experience becomes geometry. Roll, dive, throttle back just enough to keep the prop biting, split the flight into attack echelons to avoid stacking, ride the tremor through the stick until the aiming circle sits like a coin on the forward elevator. Elsewhere, Yorktown's SBDS nose onto Soryu. Each cockpit is its own cathedral of checklists and memory. The pilots know the numbers not as trivia, but as comfort. 70 to 80 degrees, release no lower than 1,500 feet, bomb fuse set to arm through the slipstream, and find the strange, quiet veterans describe. Perfect sight, perfect fall, perfect pull. The first bombs strike like punctuation, and then the long sentence of flame starts reading itself aloud. Heat blooms. Doors designed to keep weather out become chimneys for disaster. Gas lines meant to feed victories turn to fuses that serve catastrophe. Damage control teams sprint as they have drilled, but drills never include this amount of simultaneous wrongness. Aircraft being struck below, fueled and armed, elevators jammed between intentions, flight decks trapped between the need to turn into the wind and the need to comb torpedoes that no longer exist. A navy famed for choreography trips on timing imposed from above. From the water, Ensign George Tex Gay sees none of the reason and all of the truth. He tastes gasoline through salt and hides under his seat cushion when fragments hiss. When he looks again, black-orange flowers climb out of the carriers in slow blooms, and a wooden world that had felt immortal a few hours ago now looks fragile as lacquered paper. He witnesses history in colour fields and shockwaves against ribs, not in staff diagrams, and later his plain language will carry more than ornate prose could. The ships burned, they fell silent, the sea changed its smell. On Japanese bridges, orders remain crisp because crispness is the last dignity. Helm commands snap. Foam strides the bows. The cap is called higher and cannot climb fast enough. The flight deck officer shouts to keep a recovery pattern coherent while the ship refuses the air he needs. Even perfect sailors cannot be in two places at once. The doctrine that protected them from torpedoes becomes the very thing that exposes them to vertical knives. In 4 minutes, 3 carriers are fatally wounded. Kaga, Akagi, Soryu, an outcome that will sound apocryphal to those who do not understand that timing is a weapon and altitude is logistics. The Dauntless is not glamorous on a ramp. In this sky, it is the exact instrument required. Dive brakes that make accuracy a habit, a rugged airframe that survives pullouts barely shy of blackout, a rear gun that keeps clawing zeros honest. Radio calls are half syllable, half tone. Kaga, hit, pulling. And then the climbing turn, the wing dip to check a comrade's smoke, the prudent glance for a hunter who made the climb. Some planes have holes in their control surfaces that make the ship shudder like a frightened horse. Some have oil misting the canopy so the pilot flies by centerline and faith. They still climb. Behind them, the battle's center goes quiet in a way that is louder than guns. The impossible number will be recited forever. 3 fleet carriers fatally struck in 4 minutes. No myth. It is the mechanical harvest of a morning's labour. Torpedo squadrons dragging fighters down, carriers yoked by their own necessary turns, a gap opening just wide enough, just long enough, for dive bombers to fall into history's hinge. Analysts will devote admirable energy to arguing the exact minute and the exact deck cycle. Aircrew will remember only the feeling when the sight steadied and the pull-out did not grey out the world. Victory is a sum. Men recall its terms. There is one more deck in play. Hiryu lives, mobile and angry. The Americans are briefly, gloriously ahead of the clock, but the day still holds music. Counterpoint, reprise, a last hard chord to be struck near dusk. For now, the blue lane through smoke is theirs, and a formation of SBDS climbs along it with noses just high enough to promise there will be a later. What began with men who flew into a beehive without hits has become the cleanest line on the day's map, from low and slow to vertical certainty to flame. The hinge has turned. The door is open. Someone must step through. The ocean after cataclysm tries to look innocent. Smoke lies in low bands. The sun practices forgetting. Hiryu refuses to forget. Her flight deck crew spots B5N Kates and D3A Vals to the bow, with an efficiency that would be admirable even if the world were not falling down around them. There is anger on the bridge, but it wears the uniform of duty. Clear orders, clean signals, men trotting because running on a flight deck multiplies mistakes. Zeros lift to escort. Torpedo and dive bombers taxi nose to tail. The last intact sword in the First Air Fleet goes hunting. The Japanese strike leaders know the American names now, Enterprise, Hornet, Yorktown, and select a target as if insult must be answered properly. Yorktown draws the first attention, partly because she has revealed herself bravely, partly because a wounded enemy is still a sword. Radio discipline is good. Rendezvous is achieved. The formation gathers itself the way a wave does, slow at first, and then inevitable. In cockpits, men check harnesses and think short thoughts. The way a mother nodded at a gate, the feel of a futon after a long flight, the noise a Zero makes when it kisses the deck on recovery. They are not caricatures. They are professionals in a navy that has taught the ocean how to bow. Yorktown's lookouts sing contact, and the ship answers like muscle memory. General quarters, doors dogged. Damage control parties collect tools in practiced hands. The air group's wildcats tangle with escorts. Yorktown turns intelligently, smearing the attack run with wake, asking gunners to stitch the sky with 5-inch bursts and the chatter of .50 caliber. The Kates commit, long graceful lines resolving into certain terrible geometry. Some release short and skittering, some are shot into the sea, some arrive at the exact point the pilot felt in his bones when he began the glide. Impacts are not abstractions. They shove a ship's heart sideways. Yorktown staggers, then finds centre, then staggers again. Damage control begins a choreography that will be taught thereafter as religion. Counterflood. Isolate circuits. Vent smoke. Men move as if the deck were their living room rearranged by malice, identifying where a couch must go to make the path clear. For long minutes it works the way the manuals promised. Power restored, list corrected, fire checked. Radios report calmly in phrases that could be read to children if not for the nouns. The ship is hurt. She is unbowed. The Navy had trained for damage the way other navies trained for parade. Hiryu's second blow underlines that nothing in war is fair, only sequential. Dive bombers fall on Yorktown and add fresh holes to a ship that had just convinced herself she would make it. Smoke blooms dull and angry. Still she breathes. Still she answers helm and engine. The crew's stubbornness buys hours, not days, but hours are gold this close to the hinge of a campaign. On another frequency, American scouts have held to their work. Enterprises and Yorktown's SBDS reform like a covenant. When the Dauntlesses find Hiryu, the attack has the hungry calm that follows grief. Pilots call out bearings with the politeness of men passing dishes. Dive brakes open, the sight picture settles. If earlier the target decks had been clean, now men see on Hiryu the scuffs and streaks of a ship used hard in ruin. She still looks proud. She still throws splinters up when bombs strike. She still tells the world in smoke that she existed. Hits land. Fires walk forward. Another great deck goes from weapon to wound before eyes can adjust. Beneath it all, the submarine I-168 moves toward Yorktown with a patience colder than surface war. In 2 days, she will thread a path through destroyer screens and stab the cripple with steel that travels invisibly. A destroyer will die too, because days like this keep accounts past sunset. The ocean at last gets the last act it demanded. A silent arrow, a belated collapse, a farewell that feels cruel only because the ship had insisted on living. Yorktown, that stubborn, hurriedly repaired emblem of American will, goes down not today, but soon, and even in loss, she denies the enemy the satisfaction of a neat ending. The lesson is not that the enemy lacked teeth. Hiryu's strikes remind everyone that a single carrier, handled well, can bloody a fleet. The lesson is that initiative once seized rarely returns without a price the weaker side can afford least. The Americans now choose where and when. They have surviving decks, surviving crews, and the habit of learning in hours what should have taken months. Their dive bombers have destroyed a quarter of Japan's fleet carriers in one afternoon. Their torpedo squadrons have taught them how not to die the same way twice. Hiryu's last smoke across the horizon trails into twilight like a signature under a document already signed. What follows will be campaign, not duel. Inside a Navy bureau room that smells of paper and hot coffee, a chalkboard says more about victory than any painting. At the top, someone has written Mark 13, depth fuse, drag ring, and below it are columns of trials, failures, and a line inching upward toward reliability. This is how democracies fight when they are serious. They autopsy their own mistakes while the blood is still tacky. A torpedo that demanded a pilot crawl at 120 knots and kiss the waves to please it will, within a year, accept a faster, higher drop because engineers refuse to let courage be the only fix. The learning loop is ugly and fast. Fleet feedback hits a desk on Monday. By Friday, a test unit is bolted together. By next month, a production change is stamped into metal. Depth settings are corrected, so a weapon runs where its designers promised. Fuses are modified so they detonate when steel and salt meet. Drag rings and tail fairings are added so an Avenger can release outside the heart-shot lanes that killed Devastators. Instructors rewrite chalk talks to match physics. Doctrine is amended with erasers, not pride. Morse keys rattle orders that sound like humility. Try this, report errors, we'll adjust. Training explodes in the good sense. Replacement pilots and crews are shuttled through programs that have the cadence of factory lines grafted onto the art of flying boats and tail draggers. Carrier qualifications multiply, gunnery ranges eat ammunition by the trainload, instrument schools turn fear into muscle memory. At the operational edge, strike coordinators choreograph what Midway proved must be married. Fighters in the right place at the right minute. Torpedo planes and dive bombers deconflicted by altitude and time. Radios disciplined into poetry. Short lines that carry the day's music. The next time a Japanese task force sees Americans low, there will also be Americans high, and the sky will have no holes. Factories answer with a rhythm that would feel boastful if it were not needed. Avenger production lines stretch like streams braided together. New jigs reduce rework. Aluminum allocations shift to favour what wins at sea. Essex-class carriers move from blueprint to slip to shakedown with a speed that would have seemed eccentric in peacetime. A single yard will, at peak, push hulls into water faster than an enemy can invent names for losses. The impossible statistic that says more than rhetoric is this. By 1944, the United States will produce around 96,000 aircraft in a year, more in 12 hours at peak cadence than some adversaries build in a month. The number is not parade bravado, it is the quiet math behind air superiority. On shop floors, civilians become artisans of war without losing their civility. A machinist in San Diego learns to love 1/1000th of an inch enough to lose sleep over it. A woman in Buffalo discovers the trick to feeding a fabric belt through a Browning without bruising her knuckles. A foreman in Bethpage develops a superstition about the order of wrenches that he will never admit even as he enforces it. Their habits travel with the planes. Somewhere over blue water, an Avenger will take a hit and keep flying because a rivet was set on a day when someone refused to accept close enough. Abundance is more than counts. It is replacement time. American air groups annihilated at dawn can be made whole by dusk, on paper, if not in faces. Spare engines sit in crates with cosmoline thick as butter. Propellers arrive by rail the way crops used to. Fuel appears as if conjured because a fleet train now follows the carriers like an obedient river, oilers, ammunition ships, repair tenders, floating logistics that turn radius of action into a political choice rather than a physical limit. The enemy sees only the bombs and planes. He does not see the factories that add shifts when telegrams go out. Doctrine 2 is produced. After Midway, unescorted low-level torpedo runs become anathema. Fighters are stapled to flanks. Dive bombers and torpedo planes practice timed arrivals the way orchestras learn crescendos. Intelligence is weaponized into scheduling. Code breakers feed clocks. Clocks feed deck crews. Deck crews feed pilots. A carrier ceased to be a ship the moment it became a schedule. American schedules, written on clipboards and wrists and in bones, grow so confident that battles turn into operations, and operations into campaigns. There is a cost ledger that never balances. The names from VT3, VT6, VT8 fill pages that cannot be turned without wincing. But in the ugly fairness of war, their day's tuition pays for a curriculum that saves later classes. By late 1943, a torpedo squadron will launch with machines that shrug off hits that would have ended devastators, drop weapons at speeds that would have scandalized early war officers, and recover to decks that can arm and spot and launch again before an enemy finishes swearing. The Republic has learned to turn grief into throughput. The enemy has not learned how to stop a nation that treats iteration as a vow. After the guns fall quiet, the Navy does what only strong institutions can do without lying to themselves. It counts. A clerk with neat handwriting draws columns on onion skin paper and fills them with names that were faces yesterday. VT8, 15 aircraft lost, 29 of 30 aircrew gone, 1 man living to witness. VT6, 10 of 14 lost. VT3, 10 of 12 lost. The numbers are precise and cruel. On another page, a different hand records the enemy's cost. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, burned and foundered within 24 hours. Roughly 2,500 officers and men dead. Hundreds of irreplaceable airframes and worse, airmen and deck crews without equals waiting in a pipeline. An empire's ledger bleeds in ink the colour of finality. Yorktown is written into the ledger twice, once for salvation and once for doom. She is listed as damaged and reanimated by damage control that would make catechisms proud, then as torpedoed by a submarine that slipped through screens as if fate had opened a gate. The delay between hits and the sinking turns a line item into a little story about stubbornness, a ship that refused to collapse fast enough to please her enemies. A destroyer too is added with no drama in the handwriting, only dates and coordinates. Someone will later draw a straight edge under the day and write totals, and the neatness will make a witness angry for a moment, because neatness and grief share no border. In a farmhouse far inside the continent, a telegraph boy pedals up a dusty lane and rehearses the script he has been given so it will not stagger in his mouth. A mother opens a door and steps into the space bravery leaves behind. The paper is crisp and small, the words formal and scant. She will later tape it under a photograph of a young man in a leather helmet, and the tape will yellow while the photograph holds its brightness like a coin. Men at desks will say casualty. She will say name. The Republic requires both languages to be honest. On the other side of the ocean, a Japanese maintenance petty officer who lived because he was deep in the ship at the wrong minute sits on a crate and stares at his hands until the nails come back into focus. He knows the difference between a ship that can be repaired and a ship that is a story. He has counted valve covers and plugs during peacetime drills. He knows what replacing 4 flight decks means when your yards are elegant and finite and your fuel is rationed by fate. He understands what his officers will not say. The killing of the carriers was the killing of time, and time is the only resource his side cannot borrow. Analysts begin the tedious holy work of timing the day. Reports are collated and corrected, watches are synchronized across memory's drift. Diagrams are drawn to pin down what fluid courage accomplished. The 5-minute myth about decks crowded with fueled and armed strike aircraft is trimmed and corrected. The truth is dangerous enough without embroidery. What remains solid is more important. Pressure from below pulled fighters down. Evasive turns spoiled deck cycles. Dive bombers arrived at an interval so short, physics did the rest. The narrative, once purified of romance, still glows. Every ledger in war has a column that belongs to the future. The Americans add to it without knowing. Lessons captured, procedures amended, requisitions placed for things that will prevent repetition. The Japanese cannot add to theirs easily. Their training pipeline is a narrow hose. Their industry is a set of beautiful rooms in a house that is slowly being starved. The impossible statistic that will never reach the men sifting wreckage is this. By late 1943, the United States will commission Essex-class carriers in numbers that equal the Imperial Navy's pre-war dream, and not one of those Essexes will be sunk by enemy action. The number is not bragging. It is the shadow cast backward by Midway across time. At the end of the day's accounting, the clerk dries ink with sand, blows gently, and closes the cover. The act is quiet and indecent and necessary. Numbers will never be enough. Names can drown a reader who needs to steer. Between them lies meaning. Midway is a hinge because ledgers on both sides prove it. The Americans added courage to industry and wrote advantage. The Japanese added courage to scarcity and wrote loss. Tomorrow the ocean will look the same. The books will not. Dawn on an Essex-class flight deck in late 1944 looks like the answer to a question the Torpedo Squadrons asked at Midway. The deck is crowded in 2 spotted rows. Hellcats with folded wings like fists, Avengers with bellies fat for distance, Helldivers scowling as if born angry. Chocks sit like punctuation marks at every wheel. A yellow shirt dances in semaphore. A plane captain thumps a cowling with a private blessing. Exhaust stacks cough blue. The air smells of high octane and salt and paint, the American perfume of a navy that has taught ocean space to submit to schedule. Launch begins and does not stop. Aircraft clatter forward, pause at the cat, salute, vanish into the short sunrise as if thrown. The air boss's board grows lighter, the sky thickens with contrails and intentions. In an hour, this one ship will put more airplanes over an enemy than some nations could afford to lose in a season. The impossible number that sets the rhythm is recited on the mess decks without flourish. By this year, the United States has built roughly 96,000 aircraft. The fleet train has delivered oil by the million barrel into forward anchorages as if the ocean had hoses, and a single task group can bend weather and time around itself by choice. The statistics do not crow, they hum. Below the horizon, oilers and ammunition ships, Cimarron-class, AEs with holds full of loud promises, steam like obedient rivers. A repair ship swings a turret into daylight, servicing damage before memory can form. Tugs and barges make a village that moves as one. Logistics is the war's invisible poetry, and its meter has become smooth enough that combat feels like a service it provides. A pilot who snags the 3-wire today will be in a fresh airplane tomorrow if his bent one will not fly. A deck division that runs out of spare tyres will find a stack shipped forward before the lament finishes. The enemy, if he lifts his head, will see only choruses of planes and presume a miracle. It is not a miracle. It is small, honest acts multiplied into inevitability. On a bridge, a young officer watches launch and feels an emotion older than pride, relief at living inside a system that works. He knows how close the edge can be. He has read Midway's action reports on nights when the ocean sounded like a sermon. He thinks of VT8 and VT6 and VT3 as if they were uncles whose portraits watch a dinner table. He directs wind across the deck with the light hand of someone who trusts both ship and men. He can afford to think tactically because strategy has been settled by factories. Somewhere on a different deck, an old Japanese pilot, older now than a fighter should be, remembers a day when American planes arrived in handfuls and never stopped. He had tried to count them and lost arithmetic at 40. The sensation was not fear, but futility, a feeling that the sky itself had changed allegiance. He writes a sentence about it in a thin diary, polite in his phrasing, because that is how he was taught to be, and closes the book gently. He knows that his nation's craftsmen are still gifted. He also knows that gifts become relics when starved of oil and time. The sortie cycle keeps its tempo. Bomb elevators ride like stages between acts. Ordnance crews, brown with sweat and powder, push carts as if burden and momentum were the same. There is grace in the way a torpedo is slung, in the careful finger on a safety pin, in the chalk mark that means fuse armed. None of it is dramatic. All of it is how you end wars before sons become fathers of sons who also must fight. If Midway proved that courage can purchase windows, this deck proves a nation can keep them open indefinitely. At noon, a fresh package throttles down the groove, hook low, and slaps the wires with the sound a baseball makes when it finds a sweet spot. The ship breathes, resets, begins again. On the fantail, a chaplain says nothing and looks grateful for work he does not have today. In the ready room, a pilot draws a little dauntless in the margin of his brief card out of respect for ancestors. Above them all, the sky keeps accepting American metal the way a foundry accepts ore, unstoppably, almost impersonally, as if abundance were the weather now and storms were on someone else's calendar. You do not argue with weather, you pack for it. In a museum case that smells faintly of varnish and old paper, a battered seat cushion sits beside a factory punch card stamped 1942. One saved a life for a day, the other paid wages that bought time in years. Together they are the battle summarized, courage as currency, industry as exchange rate. Midway's story is not tidy heroism or cold calculus. It is both, and the seam where they meet is where the Republic's character lives. A nation asked men to fly low and slow into a beehive because it believed it could make their sacrifice decisive, then proved the belief by building a world where such odds would not be demanded again. The strategic implications ripple forward in lines historians can follow with a ruler. 4 carriers lost in one day broke the Japanese offensive rhythm, enabling the seizure of initiative at Guadalcanal and setting conditions for the Central Pacific Drive. Submarines tightened the noose while air power learned to multiply itself. By late 1943, American carrier groups operated like factories whose products were sorties and whose waste was enemy capability. The impossibility that became ordinary was not just production totals, but the speed at which ideas turned to practice. Defects in Mach 13S corrected, escort doctrine made mandatory, strike timing rehearsed until flying felt like a drumbeat anyone could march to. There is a temptation to make Midway myth, to claim that fate arranged itself to flatter us, better to keep it human. VT8, VT6, VT3 did not die for a parable. They died doing a job that older equipment and imperfect doctrine made too hard, and still their work mattered exactly because a free nation could loop lesson to line to deck in weeks. Yorktown did not intend to be noble, she intended to live, and the stubbornness that kept her afloat long enough to draw a submarine's arrow burned into the institution as a standard. Japanese sailors did not intend to be foils. They were professionals trapped by scarcity into playing history's losing music well. Modern readers ask what it means now. The answer lies in the objects under glass. The cushion says that individual resolve still decides minutes. The punch card says that minutes only matter if a system can aggregate them into seasons. A democracy that forgets either half writes slogans instead of plans. The tradition worth keeping is not swagger, but accuracy. Know your machines, interrogate your doctrine, honour your dead by making fewer of them necessary. The ethos that won in 1942 was not hunger for glory, but appetite for improvement measured in thousandths and minutes. There are statistics that still sound impossible because they are both true and hard to imagine. America commissioning 24 Essex-class carriers and losing none to enemy action. Aircraft output near 100,000 in a year. Fuel arriving forward in quantities that turned oceans into highways. But the number that matters most for a citizen is smaller. One. One officer saying, "We'll go in." One foreman moving a shift an hour because a shipment is late. One clerk correcting a torque value. One machinist refusing to pass a part that wobbles. Nation is the sum of ones, multiplied by time. Imagine, respectfully, the Japanese petty officer who survived and later wrote a single flattened sentence. "We could not replace what we lost." Imagine the American widow who kept a telegram under a photograph for decades, yet sent cookies to the neighbour boy who joined the Navy because the world needed such boys again. Imagine Tex Gay, older and softer at the edges, telling high school students what black-orange looks like, the room going quiet in a way that makes memory audible. These are not decorations. They are the fabric of the promise that sacrifice will be cashed, not squandered. The last image is not a fireball, but a morning. An Essex flight deck, peace just ahead, the sky taking airplanes for exercise rather than blood. You can hear boots on steel, laughter that doesn't apologize, the hiss of a hose washing salt from non-skid. A yellow shirt waves one more launch he will someday struggle to remember precisely because it was ordinary. The country that made such mornings out of such nights is still possible wherever citizens prefer schedules to slogans and accuracy to attitude. Midway does not insist on worship. It asks for maintenance. Keep the hinge greased. Keep the door swinging toward daylight.